and welcome to my channel, Haylee Marie Vintage. We are back for another sewing project this week. To decide this project right now, I'm really focused on just like getting through everything in my stash. As in, like, I don't think I'm gonna like tackle, all the yardage I have in my stash this year or anything like that. But I've been focusing on things that will make big dents. And one of the things that's gonna make big dents in my stash is sewing up all the wools and coatings I have. Normally I don't do this many coat stuff within kind of 1 year. I mean, I know we're in the new year, but I just did a coat a few months ago. But I know if I do this coat, it will clear all of this really heavy coating wool out of my stash. So that is what I have decided to do, is I'm gonna go ahead and tackle another coat. Also, I just have a real lack of hooded coats, and I live in Seattle where it rains a lot, so having hooded coats would be nice. So for my pattern, I am using Vogue 9016. It's a really cute pattern. It's like it's a like looser coat or like a less fitted. A lot of times you see me do those fit and flare coats. I think there's a lot of advantage to having coats that are not as defined in the waist. And I feel like one of the reasons I haven't made a coat like this is because I want it to be still fun, and I have figured out how to do that with the fabric. For the fabrics, this is just the lining. This is a lining from, it's way back the estate sale in South Carolina of several years ago. I think this is one of the last pieces of fabric in my stash I haven't actually used from that. And it is just this like gorgeous marbled like polyester fabric that I think would be really cute in a lining. And the coat itself will be made out of, I picked this up, this is like a kind of, there's like colorful speckles in this gray wool from the fabric by the pound sale that I go to every year. So I have a ton of this. It's really thick. It takes up a ton of room in my stash, so I'm pretty excited to make something with this and get it out of my stash. And yeah, I thought like kind of having the lining be so colorful with a nod to kind of the colorful specks in what is otherwise a kind of plain looking wool is a really fun idea. So that is what I'm going to do. Because it's not fitted, this coat has not that many pattern pieces, so I'm hoping that will help this pattern feel a lot less involved than the coat that I did recently, just a few months ago. So hopefully this project will not take a gajillion years, but coats are coats and they take structure, and even though this one takes less tailoring, it's still going to take some tailoring. So with that, I will have to figure all that out. My plan of attack is I'm first, of course, as always, gonna jump right into cutting out the pattern pieces in the fabrics, ironing, doing all the prep work. So that is what we're going to jump into here in a second. Alrighty, we have some bad news right off the bat. I have taken all of the pattern pieces out of the storage. I'm missing a lot of pieces. I'm missing the sleeves, the sleeve facings, the front facing, and the pocket. If I was just missing the pocket and the facing, I would feel totally good like drafting that. And I was thinking I could pull the sleeves from a different pattern, but then I was looking at the shape of the sleeve pattern and I forgot that the sleeves actually go all the way up through here and attach to the neckline. Here's the thing, I think I could probably figure out how to draft these myself if I really felt the desire, but transparently I am not feeling like I want to take up a big drafting project to make a coat right now. I already took a quick look and I can't find this pattern anywhere online to purchase. Like, even if I could purchase a different size and scale the pieces, that would potentially be an option. That I have not found any other existing images or references or physical patterns of this pattern. I am going to pivot. I'm gonna sit down on my couch, go on Etsy and eBay, and try to find a coat pattern with a hood that is similar to the silhouette and decade and all that good stuff. Well, it's not going to delay this project for you. It's going to delay this project for me for probably a couple weeks because I'm headed to my sewing retreat next week. So because of that, I'm just gonna put this project on hold. I will see you in a few weekends and I'll introduce you to a new pattern when I do have whatever pattern I am deciding to use in hand. So not ideal, but when you purchase vintage patterns, and especially like me, I purchase a lot of vintage patterns that are priced to move but haven't necessarily been checked, and when you take those risks, there are consequences sometimes, and right now I'm dealing with one of those consequences, which isn't ideal, but I partake in risky pattern buying behavior, so I have no one to really blame but myself. So yeah, I will see you in a few weeks. So here I am finally cutting out the fabric. I have found a pattern. I am going to be using Butterick 4990. I think this is a 1950s pattern, and it is a swing coat silhouette with a giant collar and then a removable hood. A hood was a non-negotiable for me for this project, so it was really important that I find something with a hood. I am not sure yet how I feel about the idea of a removable hood, but it is intriguing. So I did decide to, of course, use it, and we're going to be cutting out both of these things today. First thing here, what I'm cutting out is, of course, the outer part of the fabric. This is the gray wool blend. I am marking everything, cutting everything careful. It took a minute for me to get the layer out of this right. I technically have a second thing of this fabric that I can break into, but I was trying to get it all done on this main thing, which I think was about 3.5 yards. The second cut that I have is 5 yards, and at this point, if I can get it in the 3.5 yards and not break into the 5 yards, and then I can sell the 5 yards online, that would be ideal, but we'll see. And I just barely managed to make that squeeze. And as I continue cutting out this piece, this is my reminder that I have both a Patreon and a Ko-fi where you can go over and subscribe to a monthly membership. You'll get access to my videos a week early. I always appreciate anyone who decides to financially support my channel. Next thing I'm cutting out is the interfacing. I am doing a medium sheer level interfacing for the collar because I do kind of want it to be baggy. I don't want it to be too stiff. And then for the actual coat lapels, I am going to be using a slightly stiffer interfacing. And then I'm also cutting out some inner lining here with the sleeves, or intra-lining, R-A instead of E-R. This is going to make this coat a little bit warmer, so here I am cutting the sleeves. And then I knew I didn't have enough to do the full part of the jacket, so I figured out how to arrange the pieces to get the most intra-lining from the little bit of intra-lining I have left from the purple coat I did a few months ago. I was really trying to not have to make another trip to the store to get a different type of interfacing, so I made do, and I think it worked fine. I think for me the most important part to be lined is like the upper torso, which is what we were able to accomplish here. And then the very last thing, coats are always so much cutting out, but the very last thing is the lining. So there's less pieces to this at least, so I'm real quick getting everything marked and cut out and all that good stuff, and then we can get into the sewing. I know I was supposed to be done with the cutting, but when I started to begin assembling my pieces, I realized I forgot a very key thing, aka the pockets. So I had to real quick cut those here. With the pocket pieces now secured, I'm going to start working on the coat. In the last coat I made, I showed you kind of each layer one by one as I sewed it. Here I'm going to show you how I would technically sew this off camera, which in this case means that everything I do to the lining, I do to the interlining, and I do to the outside piece and vice versa and all that. So here I am putting in the dart for the shoulder. And then I'm getting that pinned, and here is where we're going to do something a little bit different for the interlining, because for the interlining I need everything to be as flat as possible because this is like thicker and bulkier. So I'm actually going to cut down the middle of the dart and overlay the dart pieces and sew those down like top stitch style. And once those are done, I am going to pin the pockets into place and sew those in on just the outer fabric. I don't need pockets for the interlining and lining. That would be a lot of pocketception, and that's not what we're doing here. And like usual for the pockets, I am sewing a 3/8 seam allowance because the 5/8 seam allowance will then hide these, especially since they are so bright and colorful. And then I'm pressing these open, and with that we have the back panels all prepped. So now the first step is going to be interfacing the front panels. So I am putting that interfacing onto the front edge of the coat. This interfacing, I think it's called shirt crisp fusible interfacing, is a little bit tough to get stick to wool, so it took a lot of pressing to try to get that down. It's honestly always a little frustrating to use this stuff, but I know ultimately it's the right weight for this coat. And then from there I have the darts in the front. These will help the coat sit nicely over the bust, so I am going to mark those and pin those. And once I do that on the outer fabric, I am of course going to go back and do it on the interlining, again cutting open that slit and then the lining itself as well. I did the pockets into the front off camera, but now that everything is prepped, I'm ready to sew up the side seams and the shoulder seams for all of these pieces, the lining, the outer fabric, and the interlining. Again, for the interlining, I will sew it a little bit different. It will be more like a top stitch with a overlap of 5/8 inch to get that seam allowance. And then the other two I will of course be sewing like normal. And that is going to wrap up what I am doing for the evening. It is the next day and I'm focusing on those finer details such as the collar. In the collar, again, I'm using that medium lightweight interfacing because I wanted the collar to still be able to flop over and not be stuck standing upright and kind of weird. And then this collar has something I have never seen before. There are 4 darts in the collar. Really interesting. I've never seen anything like that before. I kind of find it construction method, although it does involve 8 extra darts. That is the 4 on the front piece and the 4 on the back piece. But at the very least, they are fairly short to sew down. But I did, of course, like usual, tie off the ends of that dart, and then eventually I will clip all the extra excess threads. And then I am snipping these darts open to press them open, which is what the instructions explicitly state. Kind of weird, but I trust the instructions. They usually don't lead you too wrong. And then off camera, I attached the collar to the facing and then the collar to like the rest of the jackets because I will then sew the facings together in a very specific manner. But before I can do that, I'm going to cut a large strip of bias binding to make the little button loops that this jacket requires. I am folding that piece of bias tape in half, and I cut it a little extra wide so I could give myself a little bit more of a seam allowance while sewing this. So I'm sewing it with a 3/8 seam allowance that I will then cut down to the 1/4 seam allowance they actually asked for. I know this seems like a minimal difference, but for me, it makes a difference when I sew it versus turn it. And after turning them, I am then pinning them where they go on the coat. There are 3 buttons for this coat, 2 kind of further down and then 1 right at the collar. I am doing my best to size these loops appropriately for the buttons. And then once I'm satisfied with how those are pinned down, I am now going to pin the facing on top of everything. So in this case, I will be ready to sew all the way up along the front of the coat, around the collar, back down to the other side, and everything will be one piece there. And that wraps up the main preparation for the bodice of the coat and lining and all that good stuff. So I am going to move to the sleeves. The first order of operations is going to be to pin the sleeves closed, so just matching the long edge to the long edge. And then here I'm putting gathering stitches up along the sleeve head. This will help me ease it into the armhole. And again, anything I'm doing here, I am doing first to the lining, and then here I am doing it again with the outer fabric. And for the sleeve inner lining, I am going to hand sew the arm stitch, I guess, the like long stitch down the arm, down by hand, just using a running stitch to secure it. This I just can't figure out how to do on my sewing machine in like a non-bulky, annoying manner, so this is the way it is going to happen. And here's where I'm going to start to deviate sleeve treatments. I am hemming the bottom seam of the lining with just a double turn hem. And then for the regular coat, I am first easing the sleeve into the sleeve head. I am matching all of my seams and notches and all of that good stuff, and I'm going to do everything I can to not get any pleating or little divots into the sleeve situation here. For the lining, I did end up struggling a little bit because I did get some creases, and I just decided to live with them because they're going to be in the lining and not seen on the outer part of the garment. You would have to look really, really closely at this coat to see my mistakes. This is what I mean when I talk about you decide which mistakes you want to fix versus what you can live with. I did redo some creases for the coat, the outer fabric, but I didn't redo these creases because I knew they would harm no one. And by harm no one, I mean creases will never harm anyone, but in this case, they would not bother me for the rest of time. So one of the things I've thought about before breaks is how I can bring, roughly calling it media corner, into my videos. I mentioned in my last sewing video that I consume a ton of media, and I feel like when I do like some kind of little hand sewing tasks, it would be a good time to talk about what I'm enjoying, what I'm thinking about, all that good stuff. And right now, I mean, this is going to come out the end of February, but right now we are almost 2 weeks in to post-inauguration, and now more than ever, I've been kind of looking for some escapism. I think escapism is really healthy when done in certain doses. Of course, I don't think I can completely check out. I don't think it's responsible to completely check out, but I do think it is important for my sanity's sake to not always be engaged. So one of the biggest tools that I've always used to check out is actually like reality TV. And the reason I really like reality TV for this is because I think reality TV is actually a really low stakes way to see Took me a second to get my brain. I'm just slip stitching the sleeve hem right here. But one of the reasons I really like reality TV as a way to kind of practice escapism is while you're sort of escaping from reality, you're also kind of not. In many ways, of course, reality TV is fake. I do not believe that everything you see on reality TV is 100% real. I have a pretty good understanding on how things on reality shows work. This has been one of my hyperfixations for most of my life and started with watching The Bachelor, so I'm feeling really thankful right now. Right now, 2 of my favorite reality TV shows are running. The Bachelor is running and Traitors is running, which is also a great show. And then Love is Blind is coming back soon as well, and I'm excited to watch all of these things. And one of the reasons I really like using reality TV as like a separate world is it's a world that's not separate, but it's a really like contained space to understand or like learn about relationships within like power and all these different dynamics. In the case of 90 Day Fiancé, learn something about other countries and other cultures, which is really interesting. Brush up on my Spanish. And I think it's like a relatively safe space to just, learn about all these dynamics, see how all these dynamics enter real relationships. I think in most cases, reality TV obviously exhibits what you shouldn't be doing in a lot of these situations, but I think you can learn a lot from maybe what you shouldn't be doing. I've been binging. I had gotten like about a year's behind on all the 90 Day Fiancé franchise, so I binged most of that in January. Like I said, I have TV on all the time when I sew. And then saw the first episode of The Bachelor. I'm excited. I think Grant seems like a great bachelor. I'm hoping, having all of my fingers crossed, that The Bachelor can actually handle a black bachelor this time, because last time was a complete disaster, and it's really interesting actually to watch the fallout of Matt James and Rachel Kirkconnell happen while Grant's season has started, because infamously that relationship had a lot of very complicated politics and race and power dynamics, and even the breakup itself has had a lot of really interesting dynamics, and I've been enjoying kind of listening to all the different discourses on it. That has been, I guess, like an interesting non-real life diversion. And then Traitors, I just think Traitors is so fun. It's so campy. I love seeing all like the reality stars across the board come in and compete. I think it's fun to watch people who you'd never dream of interacting and all that good stuff. So I've been really enjoying the Traitors. And in the 4th or 5th episode, I think it's the 5th, Alan Cummings, who's the host, wore, I think if I use the photo, I could get demonetized, so I won't put it in. But he wore this really beautiful mint brocade suit that definitely has me inspired. I now have brocade on my list for when I go to New York. That's the other reason I really enjoy consuming TV and shows, is I find them actually fairly inspirational for sewing. And I really enjoy Alan Cummings' fashion. I think he does really interesting stuff with like not adhering to the gender binary and all that good stuff. I mean, I will say transparently, when I make a brocade suit like his, I'm gonna make some sort of very feminine one from like the 1940s or the 50s. But I think he does some really interesting gender bending. I love his outfit. I've been living for, of course, Gabby Wendy of Bachelorette fame, who was on The Bachelorette as The Bachelorette a few years after the show came out. And I was so excited when she came out because like when I was watching her on The Bachelor, the way she liked and dated men felt very much like the way I liked and dated men before I realized I was a lesbian. So it's been fun to watch her journey, and it's fun to have her back on TV. She's really funny, and she feels like really embraced queer culture, like really understands camp, and I've been enjoying that. Those are just the things that I'm watching podcast-wise. I don't feel like I've really found like an exciting new podcast. Audiobook-wise, I just wrapped up Sickening, which is a book about why the healthcare system in America is so broken. I thought it was a really interesting listen. I don't know that I can give it my full recommendation because I think it's actually rather a dry book. And I think one of the things that I found most frustrating is like he kept mentioning how we put people on medications when we really should be advocating for lifestyle changes. And while like in a vacuum, I don't disagree with him. Suggesting lifestyle changes to people is a lot easier to say than do. And if you don't address the mass wealth inequality in the US, you can't address lifestyle changes, because like it's an insane amount of privilege to be able to cook and prepare your own food, to be able to have time to work out. Like all of that is a really, really privileged thing to be able to do. So I just think that like lifestyle, it was specifically his chapter on statins that just across the board I really disagreed with, because even though yes, the pharmaceutical companies really profit off of the fact that like everyone at an age is prescribed a statin, I think it saves so many lives, and it is relatively cheap because I think most of those patents are out, that I disagreed with that part of the book. But I did find the rest interesting, and how a lot of the science used to promote medication is bad. It definitely gave me a lot to think about as, you know, I get older and start to need maybe more of those medications, really checking into studies myself and doing my own due diligence to make sure. There's a lot of medications on the market, the trials for which are basically the data we have out for the public is really biased on, and that's something I've always known. My mom's a pharmacist, so none of this was like particularly new to me in concept. Sorry, I'm looking for my scissors. This is a classic situation but yeah, my mom's a pharmacist, so yeah, this is not like new info for me, but it was an interesting listen to, and I think, you know, if you get it from the library or something, it's perhaps worth a listen. I don't know that I would say that I think it's the greatest audiobook I've ever listened to. I have a bunch of audiobooks up on my list. I went on a big audiobook thing because I like listening to audiobooks, because usually they're like 6 hours. So that's 6 hours that I don't have to make a decision on what I'm doing next as far as like listening to something. And now what I'm doing here is I am inserting this into the sleeves. This is the inner lining, and then I'll just stitch it to the like actual seam line. So that's what I'm doing here. Yeah, and then reading, I just finished 2 books by the same author. Honestly, like for me, as someone who didn't have a ton of diversity in the books I was reading as a younger person, really different storytelling style, because they're Nigerian and calls upon, I think, some of the Nigerian like religious beliefs and stuff, and so it's really interesting books. They're definitely not light books, and I think right now one of the things I'm really craving is a light book, but it has been really interesting reads. Freshwater, I found a little harder to get into because I found it not like hard to follow, but I found the beginning just a little harder to get into, but once I was into it, I read it pretty darn fast. And then Pet is a young adult novel, so I got through that actually really, really fast. And it was a really it's kind of like a don't want to say apocalyptic. It's almost a utopian book, actually, but it delves into the idea that like monsters never really go away in the form of just various things. And they also, actually, I think both the books I read involve some level of like the complications of gender experience. So I don't know, I thought they were both really enjoyable. They're definitely not light, but they're definitely not, I wouldn't describe them as like super dark either. But I'm looking forward to, I have a few more of their books on my queue, and I think they'll be fun to read. Right now I'm reading Mythos, which is like a retelling of Greek myths. I've always loved Greek, Rome. Actually, I've always loved mythology of any kind. I mean, I was even thinking today after reading all the Greek mythology that I find reading religious texts really interesting in general. I actually really, in general, like reading about religions, even though I am not a part of religion. I think the way that religion and all these myths and legends and things inform society is really interesting. I'm not even Christian anymore, and I have the Apocrypha on my like to read list because it was something I never read as a Protestant. So yeah, like I really enjoy kind of like religious and myth-based books. Actually, if you guys have any, I've been wanting to find like good reads for European religions, pagan religions pre-Christianity. So if you have any books that just explore that in a fun way, let me know, because I am always looking to read stuff like that. I really love books about Fae, which would be, I think, Ireland. I don't know, there were a lot of really interesting religions in Europe pre-Christianity. So yeah, if you have books that you've read that you enjoy about it, let me know, because I will happily read them. Right now, I've been needing so much escapism. I am reading things rather quickly because reading is truly the only way I can fully escape, because you can't like think about anything except for what you're reading when you're reading. But yeah, that's kind of been what all I've been into lately. I'm also rewatching both Bones and Dexter, and I really, really miss like 20 episode series. Both Bones and Dexter allow for so much growth of all the side characters, and like they all have their own arcs and their own motivations, and like they're all their own people in a way that I find our modern series doesn't go into. Like, I don't know, with Bones and with Dexter, there's just so many characters that would only ever play some sort of stereotypical role, and you would never get into like their life or their backstory or their evolution if we were watching them in a modern TV show that has like 10 episodes tops. So yeah, I've been really enjoying diving back into those on that kind of level. I actually never watched it. It was my first time watching it through, which actually, they had relatively short seasons for the time, but I did just finish up watching Big Love for the first time, which I really enjoyed. So yeah, those are kind of all the different media I am taking in. Right now, I am watching Dexter today as I'm sewing. I just needed something that I knew the storyline of, that I know I enjoy. It gets iffy after I can't remember what season, but there is a point where this show gets iffy for me, so I will exit on that. But yeah, send me your thoughts on any books. I would say I really like fictional stories that kind of touch upon religious beliefs, or myths or legends or any of that. So yeah, if you have any recs, send them my way. And yeah, I'm thinking of doing this in a lot of my videos. So let me know what you think about me real quick, giving you the quick download into everything I am watching. So today is going to be a ginormous day of hand sewing. So I am preparing myself for that. I love hand sewing mentally, but it is really, really physically hard on my body. So gearing up, but the first thing here that I'm doing is I am pressing the hem of the coat where I want it to be. And I hand sewed that hem down, but now what I'm doing here is I'm catch stitching the interlining into the coat. I'm sure there's a modern way to do this not by hand, but I'm okay with doing it by hand. I have all my braces on, and the braces really help me not have a huge amount of pain at the end of the day, even though they are a bit clunky and awkward to sew in. But I feel like this project I finally got really good at catch stitching, which is something I had been pretty mid at before, so that is always exciting. And we are reaching the point where I am going to need to put in the lining, so the first thing that I'm doing here is I am doing a double turn hem on the bottom of the lining, and after that I went along the rest of the lining, the sides up through the neck and then back down through the side, and I just did a turned over edge. And then after that, here I am, I'm going to sew in my label right here. I now take enormous pride in sewing my labels into things. I think it's really cool, and if you sew a lot, I do think getting custom labels is a really exciting way to like just feel more ownership over your sewing. Mine say made by Haylee Marie Vintage and Spooky with a little cat. And I'm sitting down for another round of catch stitching here, this time going all the way around the lining. I wanted to slip stitch this in so bad, but the instructions specifically said to catch stitch, so I listened, and this was pretty torturous. My hands actually weren't hurting too much, it was just really tedious and I got sick of it, so I actually did put this down for a few hours and then picked it back up to finish it out. I just was definitely ready for a break. I hand sewed, I think, 5 hours this day, so I was just needing a break from sitting and hand sewing. I will say though, the jacket felt very warm sitting on my lap. And after I had been working a while, Spooky of course came to disrupt me and join me in being my really helpful second-hand man when it came to sewing. And I do love her so much, but sometimes she also stresses me out when she is that close to my needles and my pins and all the things on the projects. So I'm always just trying to get her like hunkered down and stopping moving so I don't accidentally poke her with the needle. But she is so cute and I love her so much. And then the last hand sewing I could muster myself up to do tonight was to do the, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the term of them right now as I'm recording this, but they help you catch the lining down and you have like a few inches for the lining to move around, but it won't, like a catch stitch maybe. It helps let your jacket lining move around without it being able to like pull all the way out of the like coat in an unpleasant way. I do this at every seam along the hem, and then I also do it in the coat's sleeve, because here they did not clarify how you're supposed to tack down the hem in the sleeve. So I did the catch stitch because it gives me the most flexibility and like I'm less likely to get any weird pulling or tugging. But that wraps us up from this weekend's of work. I am going to put this project down for the work week and pick it up next weekend. So here I have been thinking through how the hood actually works, and while reading the instructions of how to make the hood, I suddenly remembered how the hood actually goes like up, like it folds up. So I don't want the really bright marbled pattern to go on the outside of the hood. I think it could be fun, but it's not really the vibe I'm looking for this coat. So I'm going to just cut a little piece of the gray wool fabric that will then be what you can fold up, because I do still really want the colorfulness of the hood in the background of the hood lining. I don't want the whole lining to be this wool because I think it's really bad for your hair, and also like I do want like that glimpse of the lining. I don't want that intense lining. So I am kind of like drafting this all as I go and doing some rogue math to figure out how to get it to sit exactly where it won't then fold any of the lining out. And once I figured that out, I did cut out the corresponding piece on the hood lining, and then I sewed them together here. So now they will be one large piece that is the exact same thing as the other piece. It just now is partially lined and partially gray wool that will stick out. So I was pleased with myself for this quick thinking. I don't know what it is about this, but I always do a terrible job showing you guys when I'm pleating. But the first things that I'm doing here is there are 2 pleats on each side of the hood, and I am putting those in right here, right now. This will help it hold some shape. And then once that's done, I am kind of like sewing up the back of the hood a little bit. There's going to be like this horseshoe shape that I sew, but this here is the first rounding of the hood that creates that horseshoe shape that is almost like a really, really long dart. Like a really wide, really long dart. You'll see here at the end, I'll go down to a pretty sharp point. And then here I'm pinning that horseshoe shape to the back of the hood that I've just made with those other steps. I feel like did not show the best angles here. Sometimes that's really hard for me to show the best angles, so it is what it is. But yes, I did end up fairly happy with how these hoods turned out. And then I had the 2 pieces, and that was all that I did for today because I started after work on a Friday. And the first thing I did this morning was I sewed the 2 pieces together, and now I am pressing, not ironing, pressing them down. I learned there's a difference. So I am pressing them, which is where you just put your iron down and you like press the thing, you like kind of smush it, versus when you iron and you're moving the iron around. I learned the difference of those on my recent sewing retreat, and I didn't realize there was a difference, but since I've started pressing, certain things like the edge of this hood have turned out a lot better. But even though I was pleased with my pressing job, I am going to follow the instructions advice, and I'm going to baste the edge of the hood down until I wrap up this project, and then you separate those back out. This just helps it keep your press and hold your press really well while you work through all the rest of the steps. It is also at this point that I'm going to baste the bottom of the hood together, so it will be like working with just one big piece of fabric, one big and multi-layered piece of fabric. I then sewed the ties together in the middle, and after that I'm going to match the ties together, and I will sew around them, leaving the big neck edge that I will put in the hood open. And once those are sewn, I am turning them inside out, and I'm going to give them a really good press, trying to get those corners at the edge really, really sharp and beautiful looking. I feel like that's one of the big differences between like a well-made garment and a kind of meh-made garment. I say as someone who makes meh garments all the time, I do think when you take the time to press, to like really get those corners turned out and press them really well, it does look a lot nicer than when you do what I usually do, which is ignore it and pretend it doesn't exist. But once that's wrapped up, I clip some like edges real quick because I'm trying to get where I sew the hood to stick out and give me a nice straight line for that. So I'm doing that here, and then I will pin the hood just to one side, the inside pointing to the inside. I'm eventually going to flip that in. You'll see what I'm talking about. And I'm just going to do my best to hit the center in the center of the hood and just kind of ease the hood into that line of where the tie is. And once I get that sewn in, I am now sewing in my label to what I now know is the very bottom of the neck, so that way you can't ever see it from the outside. Even though I have a label in the coat, I spent a lot of time on this coat and this hood, so I want the label in the hood as well in case the pieces ever get separated. They are both traceable to me. I don't know, that's not really what's important to me. It's important to me that they have the person who is me who made this in them. So that is what I did here. And then I am pressing again. I'm first pressing the seams of the hood downward into the edge, and then the other side of the like necktie, for lack of a better term, I'm going to turn those up 5/8 of an inch and press them down and then pin them and get them ready for some final hand sewing. sewing. After how much hand sewing I did on the coat, this is quite delightful, small amount of hand sewing. But before I hand sewed it, I did want to get the seam really well done and pressed into where the hood is supposed to turn up. I just followed loosely the same amount of like overlap between the outer fabric and then the lining. I think this was actually relatively successful. I will need to be pressed probably every time I wear it if I want it to look good, but it did do its job here and it looks great for the reveal, and this wasn't that long of a pressing journey, so I can press this anytime I want to. In retrospect though, I should have hand sewn and then pressed it. Even though after I pressed it, I pinned it all, so it would hopefully not become unpressed. It did still become unpressed, so you know, you live and you learn. And then I am sitting in and settling in to do the hand sewing. I didn't put my braces on because I knew this was going to be less than 15 minutes, and my braces are too annoying to wear for 15 minutes. So I am just sewing these without my braces and with my fingers in all terrible sorts of alignment. But yeah, it was quick and it was fine. So that worked out well enough for me. Yes, the last step of this, I am going to be pulling out the basting stitches I put at the very edge of the hood. This is where I should have just waited on pressing the hood. But after that, we are all wrapped up. For some reason, I didn't film me sewing the buttons, even though that is what I did right after I wrapped this up, is I finished sewing the buttons onto the coat. And then with that, we are all done and ready for the reveal. Alright, you have seen the reveal. I feel like I was a little awkward in this one because midway through filming the reveal, I looked over and saw a man hiding behind a car taking photos of me. The vibe went south real fast. I hopefully don't need to say a reminder to anyone on this channel, but do not be taking photos or videos of other people without their consent. It's weird, it's creepy, and it's a no from me. So yeah, I feel like I was gonna be a little awkward in the reveal, but that said, I am super happy with this coat. I'm excited to walk you through everything. And so for this wrap up, we're gonna do cost breakdown, we're gonna do final project thoughts, and then we're gonna do, I think what I've decided is I'm calling it Hope Corner. At the very end of this video, I'm just gonna talk through the things giving me hope right now. I think the world needs a lot more hope. I think we have a lot of bad things coming at us all the time right now. Hope is ultimately what's going to be getting us through however long we're going through what we're going through. So I thought it would be, I don't know if fun's the right word, but I think it's important to spread hope. So that's kind of the order of things. As always, we have a spreadsheet here. I got a lot of these materials secondhand, so some of that was more affordable. I spent $30.67 on the fabric. I got that from a local sale where they do fabric by the pound. And then the lining I got way back several years ago when I went to that estate sale in North Carolina. That's a scoop on the fabric. 4 notions between the interfacing, buttons, labels, thread, all that good stuff, I spent $17.31. And then for the pattern, I probably technically should have counted the first pattern that I bought for this project, but I did not add that into this total. In this case, I just added the pattern that I bought, which since I bought it to get this video out with like such short turnaround, I didn't necessarily shop around for the best price. And I did pay $41.37 for that pattern, which actually feels quite high. So that brings us to a supply total for me making this coat of $89.35. So I'm actually pretty pleased with that. That is a pretty decent cost coat. Of course, the main reason I was able to keep my materials so cheap was because I got them all secondhand. But I do think there's patterns out there that are swing coats that are much cheaper than the pattern I bought. I just stick to true vintage patterns, but I'm sure Charm Patterns has one, and I'm sure there's just plenty of brands out there that have basically a swing coat. This is a little bit like less challenging of a type of pattern to have, and then there are lots of different Etsy and eBay patterns out there that have like hoods that you can make, kind of like this one. Spooky is aside, right now is the time to be hyper, so you might hear her. As far as labor, this is by far the fastest coat I've ever made. Or not by far, I had that one kind of like raincoat, like lighter coat that I made a few years ago that was also not too many hours, but I think this still beat that. I spent 3 hours and 25 minutes cutting this because cutting a coat is always a lengthy process. However, because there were less pieces, because it wasn't a princess coat with a waistline, it was definitely less cutting. Sewing, I spent 8 hours back and forth between my machine and my ironing board. And then the hand sewing did take quite a while, clocking in at 5 hours and 15 minutes. So my total labor is 16 hours and 30 minutes to make this coat. Like I said, this feels pretty fast for a coat. For me, I was pleased with that. And then as always, we talk about a living wage here on this channel. So I multiplied that 16 hours and 30 minutes by $35.39, which is in theory a livable wage here in Seattle. Again, I say this every time, I think it's higher, but I still haven't found a good study. I found a lot of studies that talk about really like bare minimum living wage, which for me does not fall under the category of a living wage because that's still someone living paycheck to paycheck and barely scraping by and unable to deal with a emergency. Hello, Spooky. So that doesn't quite cut it for me. So I'm still out there looking for the type of living cost that I want to talk about. But anyway, again, I am multiplying that 16 hours and 30 minutes by $35.39, which brings my labor cost to $583.94. So for me to pay myself a living wage and cover my supplies for this coat with no profit built in, I would need to sell it for $673.29. While I understand that, of course, this coat is not technically worth that, I would not be able to sell this coat for that. I just want to talk about how clothes are made with human hands. Like, even when you're talking about a factory setting, all garments are still being touched by humans' hands to run them through the machine. They haven't really found an actual scalable robotic system to do that with, and I just think it's really important that we acknowledge that our clothing is made by hand. It involves a lot of human labor and human work. I'm not getting too deep into it in this video, but garment workers are treated really poorly, and I think it's important that we talk about that and acknowledge that, especially because it was a big reason I got into sewing. So this time I was able to find a lot more coats along this line. Hi, silly girl. Oh, I wasn't recording audio this whole time. Okay, audio is about to get a lot better because my audio was not turned on before, so sorry about that. And now I have a little cat in my lap who's messing with my microphone, so sound's gonna be questionable. But I did finally do this time the look around. I felt like I could find things that were close to the silhouette of what I made for this project. So I am, as usual, going to talk about a fast fashion, a mid-tier fast fashion, a slow fashion, and I am adding in what you could buy this at for vintage price. Realistically, these days, most of my things, the closest thing they emulate would be buying a vintage garment. Reminder, my cost for making this coat was $89.35. So that is what I am essentially trying to quote unquote beat. For fast fashion, I was able to find a similar coat for $60 at Amazon. That was a polyester blend. I'm pretty sure you can't make a coat that's this involved at that labor cost. cost and still sell it at that cost. So, I mean, I wouldn't recommend buying this coat, and there's a reason I don't link anything that I ever talk about in these. For mid-tier, I found, it's weird as it looks like Target's going somewhat department store like, where they're carrying some higher end brands on their site that I imagine are not in store. I could not find any statement on this like maker's site about how they treat their garment workers, and if there is no statement, that means that they don't care. Brands that care about their garment workers scream it from the rooftops. And this was a wool blend, so a little bit more comparable because what I sewed with was also a wool blend. And this one would have been $150 for this wool blend coat. Again, most likely not using ethical labor, and my supply cost beats this by quite a bit, again sitting at basically about $90. For slow fashion, I couldn't find exactly what I was looking for. I could either find the silhouette in nothing near fabric wise to what I was working in, or something that was not the silhouette at all but closer to a fabric. So I went with the silhouette but incorrect fabric, and that would have cost me $280 to buy. And then vintage, I bopped around on Etsy and I found swing coats like this anywhere from $80 to $180. So I've said essentially that the vintage price of this would be $120, so I also still beat the vintage price. So hopefully interesting comparison for you guys, and adding that was good. With that, we are closing up the cost breakdown and we are going to talk about the coat itself. Spooky, I have to move you for this. Also, I still think you're causing havoc. Get out of my wire. Now it's around your tail, it's around your leg, and now you're bopping me. Can you? Oh, I just touched your butt. But I wanted to be able to actually grab my coat. Okay, Spooky, how are we doing? Here's the coat. I feel like one of the bummers about the reveal and the way I filmed it, I should have filmed it with the coat open, but as previously discussed, I was pretty ready to get out of there lickety split because again, there was a strange man hiding and taking photographs of me. So with that, I didn't get to show you guys the lining, but the lining is one of my favorite parts of this coat. It makes me happy every time I take this coat on and off or get a glimpse inside the pocket. I will say I think this fabric itself is kind of icky fabric. Like, it's a pretty not great feeling polyester. However, I think it's absolutely the right thing to use when you need something a little bit more slick for a lining. Hi, silly goose. And overall, I'm really happy with this coat. It's interesting because I intentionally chose a less stiff interfacing to put in the collar. In retrospect, I wish I put something the same stiffness here in the collar. I actually think it would have given the collar a little bit of a better look and a better fold, but that's okay. The collar, I think, overall still looks really good. And the second thing, which I am going to hopefully achieve during one of my mending parties, is I need to make these loops quite a bit smaller for the buttons. I'm finding the button slides out of these really easy and it's kind of hard to stay buttoned, and I haven't made a buttonhole for like a coat. Like, I've made sleeve buttons with stuff like this. Like, we're not going to be using them a ton, but I wanted to give these enough room to make the coat easy to take on and off. But now it's so easy it can take itself off, so that's not ideal. So I just need to like hunker down one day and figure out how I'm going to make these a little bit tighter. But that's kind of the only critique I have on the coats. And for the hood, I think the hood's super cute. I like that it's a separate. This is now a hood that I can use with any coat in my closet. It won't exactly go the best with any coat in my closet, but I do think it's cute on its own. And ultimately, like, my main goal in having this hood is being able to protect myself from the rain, trying not to get my microphone. I think this is really cute, and I think it's really effective for that. And I wasn't the biggest fan of the idea of a separate hood, but I feel it's so funny because, like, basically I would say my other coats in theory are more glamorous because they're like that princess cut hourglass silhouette, and this is a little bit more blocky. But in this coat with this hood and with the ties, and like, there's just like a Hollywood flair that makes me feel like I'm about to go into the night and steal some man's wife for myself. I really like this coat, and it's fun to like try something a little different than what I usually make coat wise, because all the coats I've made for this channel have been that hourglass silhouette. So it was fun to step outside of that and make this coat. I think that's also obviously what made this coat a lot faster to make. The other thing I guess I'll note about this coat, and the purple coat I made this winter, are really like heavy warm winter coats. I will say right now, this coat that I made, which I wore to work a few days ago or yesterday, or I don't know what day it is, I wore that recently and then I wore it out today, and right now it's a little too cold for this coat. This is definitely a slightly lighter weight coat, which is good because Seattle has been a lot colder than it normally is. So normally this is a really acceptable coat for that long spring period and fall period of kind of more mild cold that we get in Seattle. So it will ultimately serve my purpose, but definitely is a little lighter than the other coats, which is fine because like I got rid of so many of my coats because they no longer fit my arms. That good to be kind of rebuilding my coat wardrobe. So I am happy about that. And now I guess going into Hope Corner, talking about things that make me hopeful. I guess what I am going to talk about now is kind of like abundance mindset, which I think in general, I find the idea of abundance mindset like kind of not as scientific as maybe what I personally prefer. And in general, when you like listen to podcasts or something else and they talk about abundance mindset, I kind of tune it out. But I have actually been trying to have or think about what abundance mindset means in a time of what feels like scarcity, which is a time that I feel like we are in right now. In a time where a lot of our needs like groceries, rent, health insurance, like all of that are going up, and it's making resources feel more scarce. How can I counter that scarcity mindset as a practice in my life? Because I think scarcity mindset does a lot of like things to you that aren't great mentally. So one of the things I've been thinking about is what I have in abundance. So actually a few weekends ago, and this was really hard for me, but I am now so filled with joy and glad that I did it. So over the years, between like people's grandmas dying and stuff, I have accumulated 5 sewing machines, and I have only bought 2 of those 5 machines. So I've accumulated a lot of machines just because I am the first person that a lot of people in their life contacts when they have a sewing machine that all of a sudden they don't know what to do with. And I have been hoarding all 5 of these sewing machines. I have no reason to need 5 sewing machines. So I've been thinking a lot about like how we can use kind of like our hoards as crafters to serve our communities. So I actually selected 2 of my machines, which both are machines that I like and machines that I've used, to give away. And I was able to I have a couple of friends who work with some refugees here in Seattle and run a sewing camp with them that teaches women to sew, so that way they can go out and make a little extra income or serve their communities. And when people graduate from the program, the idea is that they would like, when these people graduate from the program, for them to be able to have their own sewing machine. So I brought 2 of my machines over to my friend to donate to them, and she sent me some lovely photos of them and the machines. I had a really hard time letting those 2 machines go, if I'm honest. The night before I was going to give them to her, I put the machines through a sewing test because I wanted to make sure these were 2 machines I don't use as much, so I wanted to make sure that they were still great machines and like nice things to donate. And as I was testing these machines, I really, really very much felt the desire to keep the machines because they stitch nice, and one of them is a beautiful 1970s machine. But realistically, I know I'm not going to use these, and it gives me a lot of joy, and I'm so glad I was able to talk myself down out of keeping that 70s machine and instead give something that I really wanted and that I really wanted to keep to a community who this is actually really helpful for them. And that machine was just gonna sit on my shelf unused because I like 2 of my other machines more than it. And so like I've just been thinking about how like with crafting supplies, it's so easy to like hold on to stuff and use that like, but what if this happens? So I've been thinking a lot about how I can use my stash and my craft supplies and all of that to serve a greater community, and how something that I have in abundance can be used to help others. I think a lot of us crafters have a lot of abundance in craft supplies. I think I've been just thinking a lot, and it's been giving me hope thinking about how I can use not only my skill as someone who sews, but also the things that I've just collected over the years as someone who sews to serve my greater community. And I don't really have anything like super further to say on this subject. I think we're I think we're admittedly like in a space where things are feeling scarce, and it's really easy to like want more and to hoard more and to let less go. And I think within reason, of course, like make sure you're fed, make sure you're cared for, but within reason, I think we need to let go of that scarcity mindset in some ways and think more about how we can use what we do have in abundance to serve our communities, whether that's things like my sewing machines or my fabric stash, or things like my skills and stuff like that. So I've been thinking about how to have abundance, and how to not just have abundance mindset, but how to have like an overfilled mindset that allows you to better serve your community. I've been trying to like practice what I've been thinking a lot about, and again, like letting that 1970s machine go was really hard for me. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's how I was raised or my general anxiety, but like I am such a what-ifer when it comes to materials. To be fair, would I have gotten rid of these 2 sewing machines if I hadn't had an opportunity to give them to the place that they went? Probably not, but the second I heard this place had a need, that I could fill, I thought, wow, I would really love to do that. And like also, I think we all need to start practicing more giving things away that we would actually like. I think especially in America, we use donation closer to a trash can than actual donation and actual serving a community. It's kind of more like, this is stuff I don't want, and we get rid of it and we put it in the donations like we're throwing it away. And I think we just can think about how it would feel to receive somebody's garbage. I think we saw that very relevantly. I'll see if I can find an article from the LA fires where all these donation centers got overwhelmed because so many people donated things, and they donated things that were in poor condition that they couldn't even give out to people who lost their homes in the fire. I think that's actually what started to get me thinking about donating my sewing machines, reminding myself that it's important to give to people things that you want. Just because somebody is like less fortunate than you doesn't mean they are not deserving of something good. I think that's just been on my mind, and that's been something that's been giving me hope as an individual of a way hopefully I can serve my community, and also a way other people in my life can serve their communities, and maybe you can serve your communities, is finding that thing that you have an abundance of and figuring out how to help that abundance serve your community a little bit better. That wraps up this video. I hope you enjoyed. I am off next week. I will tell you, I'm feeling so good about this new schedule. I have had 2 pain-free days in the last week. And I think reducing the amount of work I'm putting on this channel has helped. I'm feeling really good. I'll be off next week, and then I will be back the week after with a video showing you all the things I've been sewing off camera and all of the time that I've now been dealing with less pain and stuff like that. So I'm really excited to come back with that. And then I'll have a couple other videos, and then of course I'll be off for another week. But yeah, it's working really well for me, and that's what you have to look forward to. Definitely subscribe and stick around to see those videos when they come out. And then of course you can always help me out by giving this video a thumbs up and commenting down below. Let me know, is there something you think in your life that you have abundance of and you're curious like how maybe you can use that abundance to create opportunities and good things for your community? I would love, like, it would make my heart so happy if we used the comments as an area for us to help identify our abundance and work out how we can serve people with it. That would be really, really cool and meaningful to me. And then of course you can subscribe to my Patreon or my Ko-fi. I have monthly memberships on both where you will get access to videos 1 week early. I will see you in 2 weeks. Toodaloo!